But last week, I ended up on this slide right here, the conclusion of part 2, and I talked about the emergence of Messiah ben Yosef. And if you recall, I mentioned last week that there is the concept within Judaism of there being two Messiahs. Messiah ben Yosef, who has to come first, and then Messiah ben David, who will come as the conquering king. But first, the Messiah has to come and suffer and die for the sins of Israel, and then be elevated, and then be exalted as the king. And we see that template playing out in the life of Yeshua. We see Messiah ben Yosef. We see lots of parallels between the life of Yosef and the ministry of Yosef and that of Yeshua. So we're going to pick up here, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about this and how Yeshua fulfills that. But today, this teaching is going to focus on the way, the growth of the way within the Roman Empire. So let's go through some review questions here. What are the 3 names for our movement that are found in the Bible? Someone tell me one.
The way.
The way. What's another one? The Nazarenes, or in Hebrew, the Notzarim. The Notzarim. What's another one? The Christians. Yeah, that's used, I think, 2 or 3 times in the book of Acts. Which one of those 3 names is used the most in the book of Acts? The way is. I think it's used 5 times. We call ourselves the way, or we are called the way, because Yeshua says that he is the way, the truth, and the life, right? That's the most. So you'll see me in today's teaching. I'll use all 3 terms kind of interchangeably. I'll say Notzarim, the way. I'll say Christians. You'll see me use those terms kind of interchangeably, okay? The next one, where was Paul taking the gospel to during his ministry, during his missionary trips? Where was he taking the gospel to? Yeah, to the Jews living in the Roman diaspora. We talked about in 63 years prior to the time of Christ, prior to the time of Messiah, the Jews were carried away. Thousands upon thousands of Jews were carried into slavery and planted all over Asia Minor and North Africa. And there they established synagogues. There they had the Greek scriptures, the Septuagint, maybe the Hebrew scriptures, where they read and they studied those scriptures. And that's where Paul knew to go and bring the gospel of Messiah and say, hey, the Messiah has come. He's here. He showed up. He suffered and died so that you could be reconciled back to God. That's where Paul went. How well was the gospel message received when he got to those places? It was kind of hit or miss, right?
Yeah.
We talked about some places like in Corinth, the Jewish community kicked them out. They said, get out of here. But some of them believed. Even the president of the synagogue in the city of Corinth believed. I think it's Corinth, if I'm not mistaken. Whereas the Bereans, they wholeheartedly believed because they studied the scriptures day after day and validated what Paul was saying was true. And then they believed, okay, this is the gospel. We should believe in Yeshua of Nazareth, right? So it's kind of hit or miss. But we notice the non-Jews coming into the synagogues, they were a little bit more receptive to the gospel than the Jews were, right? Paul got so flustered with his own people, he said, fine, I'm going now to the non-Jews. All right? He said basically, your blood is on your heads. I'm now going to the non-Jews, and I'm going to be an apostle to the Gentiles, okay? Next one. What was the overarching question for the first 40 years of the way's growth in respect to non-Jewish believers? What was that question? We talked about it last week. What was required of them in the Torah, right? How much of the Torah do they need to keep, if anything at all, to have a place in the kingdom, to have a share in the world to come? How much do these Gentiles need to do, in other words? Right? And we answer that question, Acts 15, 4 things immediately, and then come to the synagogues and hear the scriptures read. And then you'll be immersed. You'll slowly conform your life around the culture of the Bible. And that was the standard. And that might take a lifetime, but that's okay. As long as you're trying and you're learning, there is no rush. It's 4 things immediately to come in the door, and then you learn the rest on Shabbat. Next one, what happened in 70 AD that dramatically shifted the course of the way? The temple was destroyed by Titus, right? And the Roman army. They leveled the temple, 9th of Av, 70 AD. 9th of Av. Some of you may know this already. The 9th of Av is when the first temple was destroyed. 9th of Av is when the second temple was destroyed. 9th of Av is when the Spanish Inquisition started. There's many more dates on 9th of Av as bad things happened to the Jewish people. And even to this day, on the 9th of Av, which falls on August the 10th of this year, we have a complete fast day and mourning for the loss of both temples, but just a complete fast day. We fast food. So it's kind of like Yom Kippur on 9th of Av. Before the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, who was the leader or the leaders of the way? Was it Paul? No, Paul was not the leader. Paul was an apostle that answered to the Jerusalem council. Who was one of the pillars of the Jerusalem council? James. James was the brother of Yeshua, right? He was, if not the main central leader, he was one of 3 to 5 central leaders within the way. And Paul had to answer to him, right? So in today's teaching, here's what I'm going to cover. I'm going to cover 4 points. The Notzrim in the daily Jewish prayers, or the way within the Jewish prayers. The Jewish tax, and then we're going to move to syncretism and persecution within the Roman world. Then we're going to talk about anti-Semitism within the church itself. Within the way itself, there was growing anti-Semitism, which we'll talk about. So these 4 points and other events further detached the way from its Jewish roots. And we're going to talk about these 4 things today. So let's get going. Now, let me answer this question. Why are we talking about Rome? Why are we looking at the Roman church, if you will? Why are we talking about the way's growth within Rome? Why not like North Africa or Iraq or those areas? They had most of the population. Yeah, that's one factor. Not necessarily. Because there was Christians in Alexander, there's Christians in Babylon, there was Christians way east. I mean, they weren't necessarily the first ones.
Isn't that where the prophecies, the Daniel prophecies feel concerning the change?
Yes. If you look out in the landscape of the Christian world today, it is a direct descendant of Roman Catholicism. Is it not?
Correct.
We were birthed out of Roman Catholicism. I should say Protestantism was birthed out of Roman Catholicism, correct?
Yeah.
1517, right? Martin Luther nails the 95 Theses on the door in Wittenberg, Germany. They didn't protest enough, yeah. Well, the Protestant church was birthed out of the Roman Catholic Church. So that's why we want to follow that vein of history through Roman Catholicism, because that's our roots, essentially, right? So that's why we want to follow the Roman Catholic trace of history. I just want to answer that question. Okay, let's go to the fire of 64. The Roman city the city of Rome catches on fire. 3/4, some historians say, of the city burns to the ground. And it was parts of the city that were not very pretty to look at, if you will. It's kind of the wrong side of the tracks for the city of Rome that burned. A lot of people speculate that the emperor at the time, who knows his name? Nero actually set the fire. And he actually boasted about it to a certain extent. And the fires burned and burned and burned for like 3 days. They put the fires out. Then they started again and burned some more. Turns out Nero ended up using all that empty ground and built a huge imperial palace right there. Just a sprawling palace on all that empty territory and all that acreage. Well, Nero needed a scapegoat because the word was started getting out that maybe Nero started this fire. And who did he choose? He chose the Christians. He chose the way. This happened in 64. This is 6 years before the destruction of the temple, okay? And he put the blame on the way, on the people called the way, because he just didn't like them anyways. He had a weird feeling about them. So that happens. And then he kind of starts his campaign where he's obsessed with trying to eradicate the people called the way. And he heard some lies about the people called Christians, the people called the way, about infant sacrifice and these kinds of things going on that people spread throughout the Roman Empire. And plus, he just didn't like them because, number one, they didn't worship Roman gods. We did not worship the pantheon of Roman gods, and that was not a good thing. That was actually a criminal act to not worship multiple gods that the Roman government told you to worship. It was actually part of Roman culture to worship. You were expected to worship a pantheon of gods, or else you were upsetting what's called the Pax Romana. Has anybody heard that before? Which is the peace of Rome. And actually, there's a goddess called Pax. She was the goddess of peace. And if you did not worship her, then you were somehow going to disrupt the peace of Rome, and the Roman Empire would fall apart because of you. And so the Christians were looked at as people who were criminals because they did not worship the pantheon of gods. That's where that term atheist comes from. It comes from people who refuse to worship the Roman gods and goddesses. They were criminals. And so we were tagged as criminals according to Roman law. So right away we had a problem there, right, with Nero. What Nero would do is he would take and he'd round up Christians whenever he found them. He would take them to the local circus right there where they had, and he would use them as human tiki torches. He would crucify them, then burn them alive on a stake. He would let wild animals rip them apart. He would use them to ignite his games, his gladiator games. He would use the bodies of Christians who burned alive on the stakes to illuminate his games, right? And these people, I mean, all they had to do, and they gave them, this is all historically documented, they would give them incense and say, all you have to do is burn incense to Caesar, or swear an oath to Caesar, and we won't let the lions rip you from limb to limb. And many of them, thousands of them, chose the lions over the incense. And why? Why would they do that? You know, why would they suffer and die for that? They had never met the Messiah. Never. Anybody have any thoughts? Why would they suffer and die? Yeah. I think they encountered his presence, right? They came in contact with something that was inexplicable. They came in contact with redemption for the first time. They came in contact with hope. They came in contact with grace.
And Yeshua said if you endure to the end.
Yeah.
So they were
And all those
intent on
people
enduring to the end, whatever happened.
Yeah.
We may face that same choice one day.
Yeah. I pray we won't, but I mean that's the cycle of history. That's what Scripture says, is that we eventually the way will have to undergo persecution again in its future. Yeah. So he almost snuffed them out. But what's interesting about the persecution that came from Nero is that it actually caused the Roman populace to take pity on the way, and they actually felt bad for them, and their numbers began to multiply within Rome again. But I answered this question already, but why did Rome hate the followers of Yeshua? All of Yeshua's teachings are about peace. All of them are about don't try to force your kingdom. Don't try to take the kingdom by force. Obey the authority God puts over you, whether they be godly or worldly. Obey them. Then why do they hate the followers of Yeshua? Yeah.
That would be right in the face of Roman philosophy. If it was used for take over, conquer, that was what they would teach us.
Yeah.
We were right in the face of all that.
So the Roman government hates the followers of Yeshua. It hates the way because it undermines the authority of the Roman government. It says that our citizenship transcends the citizenship of the Roman world. And we are citizens of a kingdom that is not of this world, right? I've got a really cool, if I can find my Bible. Oh, there it is, right there in front of me. Let me go back to this slide here. I want to read you a letter that was in my history book. Let's see, this would have been in the 90s. There still survived of the kindred of Yeshua the grandsons of Judas, which is one of the younger brothers of Yeshua, I believe, who according to the flesh was called his brother. And these grandsons were informed against as belonging to the family of David. And a servant of Domitian, who was emperor in the 90s of Rome, he brought them before his throne. And he asked them whether they were of the family of David. So you can picture these two simple Jewish guys getting shipped all the way from Israel to the palace of Domitian, the emperor of Rome. You imagine their hearts were just pounding outside their chests, right? Why are we here? And Domitian says, are you of the house of David? And they confess that they were. And next he asked them what property they had or how much money they possessed. They both replied that they had only 9,000 denarii between them, and each of them owning half of that sum. But even this, they said, they did not possess in cash, but the estimated value of some land they owned, consisting of about 39 plethra only, out of which they had to pay the dues, and that they supported themselves by their own labor from that land. So they were farmers. And they began to hold out their hands, exhibiting as proof of their manual labor, the roughness of their skin, and the corns raised on their hands by constant work. Being then asked concerning Christ and his kingdom, what was its nature, and when and where it was to appear, they returned answered that it was not of this world, nor of the earth, but belonging to the sphere of heaven and angels, and would make its appearance at the end of time. And when he shall come in glory and judge the living and dead, and render to everyone according to the course of life. So Domitian passed no condemnation upon them. Probably thinking that they're crazy, right? but treated them with contempt as too mean for notice, and let them go free. And at the same time, he issued a command and put a stop to the persecution of the church in Rome. So I thought that's an interesting thing. Luke 21:12 says, "You will be accused before governors and kings. This will be your opportunity to tell them about me." I thought that's neat. So during the reign of Nero, Paul conducted his Ephesian ministry and completed his third missionary journey. Okay, so during the times of Nero was a bad dude. He hated the way. Paul was placed in prison probably 2 times during Nero's time as prisoner, or Nero's time as emperor. It was during this time that both the apostles Peter and Paul were executed by the Roman state. Paul was beheaded and Peter was crucified upside down upon his request. Remember, you might know this, he didn't want to be crucified upright because that would resemble too much Messiah being crucified, so he asked to be crucified upside down. Talk about humility. I mean, in the face of death, you're like, no, you got to hang me upside down because I don't want to die like him. You know, that's too honorable. Let's go to 1 Peter 2, 11 through 17. 1 Peter 2, 11 through 17. If you have it, I'm going to call on somebody else to read. 1 Peter 2, 11. So Nero is emperor, right? Nero is trying to snuff out the way. You got it, Bob? Yes. Would you stand up and read it for everybody? 1 Peter 2, 11 through 17.
So dearly beloved, I beseech you...
Well, pause a second. Sorry. So as Peter is writing this, who is the emperor? Nero is. Okay, continue, sorry.
Dearly beloved, I beseech you as strangers and pilgrims, abstaining from fleshly lust, which war against the soul, having your conversations honest among the Gentiles, that whereas they speak against you as evildoers, they may be made by your good works, which they shall behold, glorify God in the day of visitation. Submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be the king as supreme or unto governors, as unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of them that do not do well. For this is the will of God, that with well-doing you may not be silenced to the ignorance of foolish men, as free and not using your liberty for the cloak of maliciousness, but as the servants of God. Honor all men, love thy brotherhood, fear God, honor the king.
Can you imagine reading those words for the first time, and you know that your emperor is Rome? And he's like, submit to the king, right? Don't try to forcibly overthrow the king. Submit to him, because we serve a king that's over him. You know, in essence, like your citizenship transcends Yeshua's kingship transcends the emperor's. So just submit to him. God put him there for a reason. And it turns out it was a good reason, because the sect known as the Way began to grow and expand within the Roman Empire because of Nero's persecution. It actually had the opposite effect of what Nero was trying to accomplish. So now the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, as we just said, in the 9th of Av. Because of all the costly warfare that took place in 70 AD, remember Titus went through this lengthy battle trying to lay siege to the city of Jerusalem. Hundreds, if not thousands, of Roman soldiers were killed trying to take the city of Jerusalem. Titus was embarrassed, humiliated as a general. He looked bad because of this ragtag group of Jews basically fended off 4 legions of Roman soldiers for months and months. He leveled the entire city. Yeah.
Was that what the Maccabees were?
No, the Maccabees were about 160 years prior to that, or about 200 years prior to that. Yeah, those are the Greeks, the Seleucid Greeks. So what the emperor does, Emperor Vespasian, what he does in 70 AD is he issues a tax and places a tax on the Jewish people. And he says, because you caused us so much grief, here's what we're going to do. Remember that temple tax that your scriptures tell you you're supposed to pay to the temple? It's a half shekel, right? Here's what you're going to do. We're going to now take that temple tax that you used to give to your temple, and we're going to take it from you, and you're going to give it to the temple of Jupiter in the city of Rome. And we're going to use it for the upkeep of our temple, of our God. And it's called the Fiscus Judaicus. While the temple tax in Israel was payable only by adult men between the ages of 20 and 50, according to Exodus 30, the Fiscus Judaicus was imposed on all Jews, including women, children, and elderly, and even Jewish slaves. So everybody had to pay the Jewish tax. And that was a huge financial burden if you were a Jew and living in the Roman Empire at that time. And it was a slap in the face, right? If you know that your livelihood is now going to a pagan temple in the city of Rome, right? Just salt in the wound. Domitian, who ruled between 81 and 96, he expanded Fiscus Judaicus to include not only born Jews and converts to Judaism, but also on those who concealed the fact that they were Jews or even observed Jewish customs. Domitian applied the tax even to those who merely lived like Jews. So you remember the sect known as the Way, the Notzrim, were completely, almost inseparable in theology from that of the normative Jewish communities. They kept Seventh-day Sabbath. They celebrated the Jewish holidays, the feast days. They probably kept elements of kosher. They looked very Jewish. And many of them were Jews, right? But many of them were non-Jews who began to take on Jewish customs or elements of the Torah. And so according to that, they would have to pay the Fiscus Judaicus. So Adrian and his family, they hear about the scriptures of Israel, and they experience the presence of God, and they want to know more. They want to experience more about the God of Israel and learn more. So they begin to come to the synagogue, the local synagogue in their city, and hear the scriptures read, and they get all excited. Wow, there's resurrection of the dead. There's a God who wants to have a personal relationship with me. There's a Messiah, right? And he's promised a Messiah. But then they walk out after a few weeks of coming to the synagogue, and there's a Roman tax collector. All right, time to pay your temple tax. Time to pay the temple tax to the temple in Rome, to Jupiter. And suddenly they have to make a decision. So Adrian has to pay for him and all his family members. And I don't know how much that would have equated to months-wise of salary, but it would have been a hefty fee to pay just so they can come into the synagogue and hear about the God of Israel and learn about the God of Israel. So do you think he's more or less incentivized to continue coming and learning about those things and doing those things that Jews do? Yeah, that's a big discouragement, right? Suddenly you have to pay this huge fine to do that. So this is one of the very first tools used to divide the early church from its Jewish roots. Because then it's like, wait, I don't want to look Jewish or do Jewish things, so I'm just going to believe in the God of Israel and the Messiah of Israel, but I'm just going to kind of put all that Jewish stuff, off to the side a little bit because I don't want to have to pay that tax. Or I'll do it secretly. I'll do it in my home in secret. I'll keep Shabbat in secret. Right? So that's what they started to do because they didn't want to get fined. So this is one of the very first things that the Roman government used to kind of sever the ties between the Way and the normative Jewish community at that time. So non-Jews, members of the Notzrim, non-Jewish members of the Notzrim had to decide if the cost was worth it. Meanwhile, Jews who had already disliked the Notzrim, already disliked the Way, they were ratting people out. Hey, they're coming here, they're not paying the tax. They've been coming here for a few weeks now or a few months. They're doing things, they're keeping Shabbat with us, they're celebrating Passover with us. They began to kind of rat them out. They became accusers of the brethren. And this is perhaps where we get in Revelation, it says the synagogue of Satan, because Satan means adversary or accuser. So you can read that verse maybe in a little bit more context now, that there was Jews who were accusing members of the Way for being a part of their community. And they didn't like them to begin with because, well, they were weird. They believed in a suffering servant Messiah who had to die, and that's awkward for us. So let's just get them out of here. They're kind of like problems. Let's get them. So let's rat them out to the government, and it'll disincentivize them to want to come to our synagogues anymore. Hebrews 10:32 says, "But recall the former days when, after you were enlightened, you endured a hard struggle with sufferings, sometimes being publicly exposed to reproach and affliction, and sometimes being partners with those so treated. For you had compassion on those in prison, and you joyfully accepted the plundering of your property, since you knew that you yourselves had a better possession and an abiding one. Therefore, do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward." You can kind of read that verse in a little bit more context now, right? Knowing the tension there, right? And knowing that people were being publicly ratted out by non-believing Jews in the Jewish community. So because of the Fiscus Judaicus, the Jewish tax, it was very costly to be associated with Jews and resemble anything Jewish. Roman taxing authorities did not care if you were a convert, a Jew, a non-Jew doing Jewish things. If it looked like a duck or quacked like a duck, it was a duck. Right? Same thing. I mean, if the Roman taxing authorities came in this room today, raise your hand if you think you'd have to pay that fine. We'd all have to pay that tax, according to Domitian's rules. I see people taking pictures. You're welcome to do that. I don't want to go on if you're still taking a picture. You're totally welcome to do that. Point 2. So I covered point 1. Point 2 of 4. The Notzarim and the daily prayers. The normative Jewish community was doing everything it could to oust the way and get them out of their synagogues. They were a problem. They were a nuisance. So what they did, one of the things they came up with early in the movement, about I think it's 170 if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong. We talked about this a few weeks ago. Jews pray 3 times a day. One of the prayers that they pray every single time that they pray is called the Amidah prayer, which we prayed a portion of just a few minutes ago. It consists of 18 benedictions. Well, what they did is they added a 19th benediction. This is the 19th benediction that they added. And it says, "For the apostates let there be no hope, and let the arrogant government be speedily uprooted in our days." And I don't want to say the rest because I don't even want to speak that. But you can see, let the Notzarim. And it's right there. I actually pulled an old Hebrew, where's that? Veha Notzarim, right here. Veha Notzarim, Veha Minim, the heretics. The Notzarim and the heretics. What they did is they wrote this into the daily prayers. So that if you were a Notzri, if you were someone who was a follower of Yeshua, and you came into the synagogue, and I had suspicions, okay, I think Bob is probably a follower of Yeshua. I think he's a member of this sect known as the Way. Bob, can you come up and lead prayers for us today? Can you read through the Amidah? He would get to that part, and he would say, he would either skip it, or he would sit back down, or he would decline to even lead the prayers. Aha, you are a member of the Notzarim. And we could report him to the authorities, we could kick him out, we could steal his property, we could do all kinds of things. We could boycott his business. So it was a brilliant idea. It was a brilliant way to continue to sever that relationship of the Way with the normative Jewish community. So we have the Jewish tax. It became very costly to be associated with the Jewish community and go to the synagogues and hear the scriptures. Remember I said that books like this were not to be found anywhere. They didn't make books like this back then. So if you wanted to hear the scriptures read, you had to go where the scriptures were, and they were in the synagogues. It was very rare to find one of these, to find a Septuagint or a Hebrew scroll, a Torah scroll, anywhere other than the synagogue. And who owned the synagogues? Who ran the synagogues? The normative Jewish community did. So you can sense the tension there, right? You can feel it. It's very volatile. But the divide is growing between the Jews and the Way. And as that divide continues to grow, the Way continues to lose its heritage, lose its DNA as being a sect of the Jewish world, a sect of Judaism that did very Jewish things. And it begins to lose that, and some of that begins to get washed out, and we'll talk about that here in a second. I just answered this. Where were the scriptures at this point? Romans 3:1-2 says, "What then is the advantage of being a Jew? Or what is the value of circumcision? Much in every way." Why? Because they have been entrusted with the very oracles of God. How many of you saw the scroll when we unrolled it on Shavuot, right? Those are the oracles of God. And they were entrusted with preserving the oracles of God because they meticulously copied those things down. You can take one of those Torah scrolls and you can compare it to one of the Dead Sea Torah scrolls, one of the fragments of the Torahs that we have from the Dead Sea, or the Isaiah scroll. And the handwriting, it's so close. 2,000 years have gone by, and every copyist is rewriting a different scroll. But to compare them, it's amazing how similar they are, and how meticulously they've kept up with copying those scrolls. So in summary, the Fiscus Judaicus, or the Jewish tax, it was one of the first tools used to divide the sect of the Way from its Jewish identity and its DNA. It became politically and monetarily very costly to resemble a Jew in practice and attend the local synagogue to hear and study Scripture. As a result, the Notzarim, the Way, it began to secretly meet in homes where they were unable to glean from Jewish wisdom, the sages, the Scriptures. There were some Jewish believers maybe who you met with, and maybe they knew about Jewish life, maybe they knew about the Torah, and they could teach you, but it was all orally. It was all just, I'm just doing this from recall. Right? They didn't have copies of the Scripture. They had maybe letters floating around from the apostles, that maybe someone brought a letter in from the Apostle Paul into your town, and into your home where you guys were secretly meeting. Okay, let me take a couple hours and try to scribble that out and copy it really fast. So we have a copy of that for our community. But there was none of this like legitimate Septuagint or scroll that you had in your home. But yeah.
So this was a perfect setup for why Paul had to write letters to iron out some
Yes.
real errors in the body, because they were cut off from the roots. They didn't have anything to back it up.
Absolutely.
They were just
They didn't have leadership or hierarchy or anything like that. Yeah, absolutely. So there was a lot of, and so many Gentiles coming from pagan backgrounds, gross pagan backgrounds, coming into the communities of the way and bringing all that baggage with them. These are people who had no idea what sexual immorality was, right? And they're coming into the communities, coming into your home. Can you imagine that? And coming in droves. And you're trying to teach them sexual morality or trying to teach them kosher or things like that. And it's like they have no concept for that. So Paul had a mess on his hands.
And then the second question, so are you going to talk about Constantine and how what he did,
Yes.
how that brought it even further
Yeah,
on?
just be patient.
All right.
Romans 12:14. I miss you sitting up front. You're like my cheerleader up here usually.
Shannon's here today.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's good to see you, Shannon. Romans 12:14 through 18. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those... hold on. Where is Paul writing this letter to? To whom is he writing this letter? To Romans, living in the city of Rome. Does this have a little bit more context now as you read it? Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And Paul is writing to a community and a group of people who it feels like the world is crushing in around them. They're being ousted by what they think is their own people. Probably their own family members are betraying them and ratting them out. They're criminals, right? Because they don't believe in the pantheon of gods, nor do they worship them. They worship the one true God of Israel. And they're learning Jewish things that look very odd to their family members. And they're being cut off by family members. I mean, there's a lot of hostility going on there. I mean, we experience that sometimes today too, don't we? I mean, how many of you started keeping Shabbat and your family was like, wait. That's for the Jews, right? Well, if you were a Roman living in the first century and you began to do things like that, hey, I want to try to keep Passover this year.
But it's
Whoa.
It's still like that. The
Yeah.
Jews in Israel, they don't want to associate too much with people that believe in Messiah.
Oh, no. Yeah, persecution in Israel of Notzrim. And actually the word Notzrim is what they call themselves to this day in Israel. So if I was a Orthodox rabbi in Israel, I would say Ha-Notzrim, the Notzrim. They don't use Christians, they say Notzrim. So, which means the little vines. But yeah, the persecution right now in Israel is fierce.
Yeah.
But despite that, the movement is resurging in Israel right now, and there are tons and tons of Jews who are coming to faith in Messiah. Yeah, and Denise will be here at 2 o'clock, and she's going to talk about some of that today for you. Yeah.
This past week we saw on Christian television network, one of them, they were covering Messianic Jewish Alliance of America was doing a big concert and outreach.
Yeah, I saw that.
Oh my gosh! And I think it was Douglas Keem, I can't remember.
Yeah.
One of the really right-wing, super orthodox that were attacking them, and
Yeah.
the first wave of police that came, they even deferred them.
Yeah, they had it was like a closed event.
And all this other stuff.
It was a closed concert. It wasn't like they were trying to missionize, their fellow Jews or anything. But yeah, this organization came and attacked the concert and tried to shut the concert down. They had like noisemakers and all kinds of stuff. Like, yeah, the police had to come and like try to break it up. Yeah, it's very alive and well. Hebrews 10:25, and let us consider how to spur one another to love and good deeds. Let us not neglect the meeting together, as some have made a habit. Remember, I said it became very hard to meet together if you were one of the Notzrim. It became illegal to sit around and talk about the scriptures. Just from all different fronts you were receiving persecution. And the writer of Hebrews is saying, still, let us not neglect meeting together. It's very important that you still get together and fellowship with one another and encourage one another in the faith. I'm going to go now to, I've asked John to research this guy. And what year was it? Was this 190-ish?
130 to 1.
Okay. I asked John to take 5 or 10 minutes, give me a break to drink some water, and he's going to talk about this guy and what he did to the sect known as the Way. So come on up, John.
Shalom, everybody.
Do you need a microphone?
I think it'll be fine. Can everybody hear me? Everybody? All right. So, yeah, Gabe and I were talking about this guy. This was, when I was back in college, this was one of the first people I really read about. And it was kind of like, it seems really interesting, his influence on the church, because the church, Catholicism actually excommunicated him from the church. He was sort of a cast out. But when you read a lot of his teachings and ideas, we can kind of see how they last today in a lot of church doctrines. Not so much the very ideas themselves, but sort of the hint of it. And sometimes that's all you need to change a subject. So Marcion was born to wealthy parents in 110 AD. His father, it's supposed that his father was a bishop in one of the churches in Turkey. And so there's several stories about how him and his father had a falling out. It may have been adultery, may have been something else. But he had the money from his family to be able to travel to Rome after him and his dad had a falling out. So he arrives in Rome, and this is sort of what I call the high point of the Gentile church. This is when, it's more Gentiles than Jews at this point. Sort of after the temple has been destroyed, and Gentiles haven't. There's a lot of miscommunication, some misconcepts, but they're not purposely trying to do anything wrong, and there's not a whole lot of anti-Semitism on a large scale in the church yet, but it's growing slowly. And so some of the teachings that Marcion had so he was a dualist, so he did not believe that the Hebrew God was God the Father. He did not believe he was the God of Jesus. He believed that there were two different gods. There was this supreme being that was the Father of Jesus, that was nothing but a God of love and mercy and benevolence, all good. And then there was another God called the Demiurge, which is what is the Hebrew God, who was this cruel, vindictive, mean, ugly, legalistic God with a bunch of rules. And so he was incredibly against the Demiurge and the Hebrew God, and basically said that Jesus' teachings, as he was teaching them to be, which was all about grace and mercy, there was no justice, no righteousness. He's basically saying that Jesus' teachings are incompatible with anything Jewish, but he did not say the Old Testament was fake. He firmly believed that the Demiurge was the God of the Jews, and that was for the Jews. So this is the first time you really see someone coming out and saying that this God is of the Jews. We should have nothing to do with him or his things, so Sabbaths, eating kosher. And interestingly enough, he was one of the first people to actually create a canon. At this point, the only things you would have been Torah scrolls of the Tanakh. Some of Paul's letters, if they were copied, and they did have they did have the Gospels written, but nothing was canonized. I didn't have anything like this. We didn't have different versions either. So he made a Bible that consisted of the Gospel of Luke, after he cut out the first 2 chapters, 10 of Paul's letters, a few omissions and additions, sometimes just a word. Sometimes he would omit or add just a word, a lot of times like presuppositions and prefixes, to sort of change the meaning of the sentence or the paragraph. So one addition to these, which I'll read to you, was in Luke 23:2, and I'm reading from today's English version. So in Luke 23:2, it's where Jesus is before Pilate, where they began to accuse him. We caught this man misleading our people, telling them not to pay taxes to the emperor and claiming that he himself is the Messiah, a king. Marcion, in his version of Luke, added to this, quote, and destroying the law and the prophets, so to make it say as though Jesus was actually against the law and the prophets. So against the only things they had at that time that were considered true scripture. Like when Paul writes to the Bereans and is thankful that they're searching the scripture, the only things at that time that would have been considered Scripture would have been the Torah and the prophets and the writings. Another one of the things that Marcion, he did not believe in a bodily resurrection. He didn't believe Jesus came in the flesh. He believed he was only a spirit, and really kind of pushed the idea of uber spirituality, which sort of led into Gnosticism as time went on. The Gnostics adopted a lot of what Marcion taught and promoted it as their stuff. And so this is sort of where the church embraced the idea of, in the end, everyone dies and goes to heaven, and that's the ultimate goal, where Scripture affirms again and again that the goal is God coming to earth and being among man, not the other way around. So that's where that comes from. Catholic scholars actually maintain to this day that the Apostles' Creed exists almost entirely to counter Marcion's ideas, which were so prevalent at the time that one of the early church fathers, Justin Martyr, even wrote in his first apology, which was his first public book, that he wrote this in 150 AD, that Marcion's ideas are everywhere. Quote. And so, and he had the money to have these things written and to pay people to speak. So instead of having newspapers, you would have someone stand on the street and read aloud or talk aloud, orally, just give and talk. So, and most of us wouldn't have been able to go back home and be like, I'm going to go look at my Bible and check and see what this guy was saying on the street corner is correct. So if you're hearing, the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth is totally incompatible with anything of the Jews, so you need to have nothing to do with the Jews, and you have all these things going on with the Jewish tax and the anti-Semitism rising up in the Roman Empire, it becomes very easy to sort of become agreeable to that mindset. So that's just a little bit of him for you. Marcion is trash.
Yeah, Marcion kind of started that concept. Have you ever heard the verbiage, the God of the Old Testament? You ever heard of that? That's Marcionism. That's kind of still lingering within the Christian church today. The God of the Old Testament. That's the God of the Old Testament. And then there's the God of the New Testament. God's God. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. There is none of this God of the Old Testament and God of the New Testament. He is the same. He's not changing.
When did Marcion come on the scene?
130.
Yeah. So mid-2nd century.
Because
Very destructive.
By the time Justin Marcion spoke against Marcion, and that's the thing. Sorry.
No.
That's the other thing about Marcion, that from a historian perspective, that's what's interesting, is all of his writings destroyed by the church, by Protestants. But because the early church fathers wrote so many things against him, and we know almost like everything he said. So it would be like sort of if everything you ever did or said or wrote was destroyed or erased, someone kind of came across letters about you, like maybe had writing to you about Suzanne. And like no one's ever heard Suzanne or read anything by Suzanne, but because he talked to about Suzanne, people knew, there's a person Suzanne that said this and thought this, etc.
Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan, for sharing. And Jonathan's going to be teaching July 6th, right, on the Torah portion that week. So when I'm out of town, so I've asked him to prepare teaching for that. Yeah.
We ran across this guy a couple of years ago when we were studying the Torah portion, and I did some research. You can actually buy this guy's Bible online.
Really? That's very fascinating.
And you have to be really careful when you're going out there and you're buying this stuff and you're seeking it out and you're looking to learn. And because a lot of people thought, because there's a lot of talk about him, that he was a good guy. But like you said, he was trash.
Yeah.
He's trash.
What they did was they stuck right in the middle and
Yeah.
made this hole in this new.
Yeah.
It's one book. I mean,
It's
we don't
one
have-
continuous story. Yeah.
His word is a beautiful tapestry
Yeah.
of love and truth and grace all the way from back. All the way to the end. It's not that there was no grace back then.
Absolutely. Yeah. So he capitalized upon this tension that was already happening within the Jewish community in the sect known as the Way, and he said, I'm going to further divide these two groups of people, and I'm going to teach this false doctrine Well, the ghost of Marcion is still alive and well within Christianity, in some sects of Christianity, unfortunately. Fast forward to 312, Constantine becomes a Christian. So now the leader of the Roman world adopts Christianity as his religion. And a lot of historians actually believe that he did this to unify his empire. It was a last grab of power, basically, as his empire was becoming divided. And he saw that as being a really popular move to make, but not much changed about his way of life. And tons of historians agree with that fact. Here's some things that he said. If you can't beat him, then change him from within, right? Constantine in 321 says, on the venerable day of the sun. You see, pause for a second. Did you know the Romans worshipped the sun?
Yeah.
On what day?
Sunday.
Uh-oh. All right. Moving on. On the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and the people residing in the cities rest, and let all the workshops be closed. In the country, however, persons engaged in agriculture may freely and lawfully continue their pursuits, because it often happens that on another day it is not so suitable for grain sowing or for vine planting, lest neglecting the proper moment for such operations, the bounty of heaven should be lost. So what is he doing here? He's saying that, hey, we're used to worshiping on a certain day. Let's just keep that going, but make it about somebody else, right? Is basically what he's doing. Council of Laodicea, fast forward to 364. Christians shall not Judaize and be idle on Saturday or Sabbath. Shame on you guys. But shall work on that day. But the Lord's day they shall especially honor. And as being Christians shall, if possible, do no work on that day. If, however, they are found Judaizing, they shall be shut out from Christ. So, I see a lot of hands going up all of a sudden. Yeah.
Well, I had read an interesting fact about how they kind of rationalized that in their head, and it was that since Sunday and the sun is light and we see God as our light, then it's like we're viewing that as now we're worshiping God the light.
Yeah.
Like they took it that step.
It's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Here's my thought process on it. So, a thus saith the Lord. You need another thus saith the Lord to cancel out a thus saith the Lord. That makes sense? Can we all agree with that? There is nowhere in Scripture where there is a thus saith the Lord, the Sabbath is changing from Saturday to Sunday. And even the Roman Catholic Church says, and we're going to actually talk about that right here in his book. I saw your hand. I'll go to it in just a second. I promise. We're just running low on time. I got about 6 minutes. The Roman Catholic Church, where did it go? This is a screenshot from a book. Oh, did I leave it at home? No, I got it right here. The Roman Catholic Church says this. This is an apologetic book written by James O'Brien. It's called The Faith of Millions. It was written to Catholics to explain to them why Catholics do what Catholics do. Okay? And one of the things that Catholics do is worship on Sunday. All right? He says this. Since Saturday, not Sunday, is specified in the Bible, it's curious that non-Catholics who profess to take their religion directly from the Bible and not from the Roman Catholic Church still observe Sunday as their rest day instead of Saturday. Yes, of course, it is inconsistent, but this change was made about 15 centuries before Protestantism was even born, and by that time the custom was universally observed. They have continued the custom, talking about the Protestants. They've continued the custom, even though it rests upon the authority of the Roman Catholic Church and not upon the explicit text of the Bible. That observance remains a reminder to the Protestants of the Mother Church, from which the non-Catholic sects broke away, like a boy running from home but still carrying in his pocket a picture of his mother or a lock of her hair. Talking about the Protestant Church. So here we have some interesting points. A leader in the Roman Catholic Church is admitting that the Roman Catholic Church had no scriptural authority to change the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday. And not only that, he's saying that Protestants who still observe and recognize Sunday as the Sabbath are doing so because they long for their mother church and they're carrying a token of memory from their mother church, that is the Roman Catholic Church. So someone send this to Chick-fil-A for me, please. We need to get on the same schedule. I don't know. I thought that's interesting, though.
And
the changing
Hobby Lobby, too.
Hobby Lobby, yeah. Syncretism. And I'm gonna finish on this point, I think, and then we're going to time for Q&A. I didn't get as far as I wanted to today, but again, there's no rush. Syncretism. What is syncretism? It's the amalgamation or attempted amalgamation of different religions, cultures, or schools of thought. This happened in the sect known as the Way, unfortunately. as it grew within Rome, as it grew within other places, Europe, United States of America, syncretism happens, and it's almost unavoidable, to be honest with you. Like Dia de Muerta, the day Muerto. Oh, okay. Hey, I just copied and pasted this, right? That's the Day of the Dead, and this is an example of syncretism within Mexican culture. Does it go beyond Mexico? It does go beyond Mexico. Okay. But this is syncretism. This is rooted in pagan death. I mean, it's got death all over it. It's the Day of the Dead. But Roman Catholics have synchronized this with their faith. The next one is, I don't know if I'm botching this, Fete Gede, which is voodoo mixed with Roman Catholicism. It's voodoo and Catholicism mixed together. The next one is New Age spiritualism. And you see, what does she have right here? The New Oxford Annotated Bible, and she's doing like a yoga chant. It's syncretism. That's straight out of like Eastern mysticism and Hinduism and all kinds of stuff. It's syncretism. Have your cake and eat it too. Yeah.
That was the whole point of what Constantine did.
Yeah.
He was trying to bring Chinese paganism to Christianity.
Yeah.
So he brought in all these pagan rites, pagan festivals, whitewashed them, gave them a new name, such as Christmas, Easter, etc. But it was
All right, now, whoa, hold on. No. Yeah, that's absolutely, that's why.
Exactly what he did. In his
How many of you know that the Easter and a holy day that fell on December 25th were celebrated in the times of Yeshua by the Romans? How many of you knew that? How many of you know that Yeshua did not celebrate those days? He did not celebrate his own birthday on December 25th. Those were already existent holidays even before the times of Yeshua. They were already there. They were already celebrated by people who were doing things on those days that were unspeakable. And yeah, absolutely. We took a couch cushion and reupholstered it, right? And said it's about Messiah now. But what happens with couch cushions is over time as the upholstery wears out, and you begin to see what's really underneath that upholstery, right? And you walk into any department store 2 months before Christmas, and what do you see? You just see materialism. You see idolatry. Same thing with Easter. You see fertility. I mean, bunny rabbits and eggs and all this stuff. What better way to celebrate the risen Messiah than to go Easter egg hunting, right?
things that are different are never the same.
That's syncretism, though. And unfortunately, it happened to us. It happened to the way. And we have a big job ahead of us, and that is to figure out what is scriptural. What did our Messiah do? Because I want to do that. I want to do that. What did he not do? But here's the thing, is what Messianic people like to do sometimes is they like to define themselves as, here's what I don't do. They like to define themselves as people who don't do stuff. We need to define ourselves as people who do stuff. People who do the stuff of Messiah. To do acts of kindness, to acts of mercy. But also, here's when we celebrate the birth of Messiah. That's one of the first things I say when I don't celebrate Christmas. People are like, when do you celebrate his birthday? You know, that's what they're like, really, really terrified that I don't celebrate his birthday. I'm like, well, I celebrate his birthday when I believe he was born, and that is during the Feast of Tabernacles. That's when I believe he was born. That's when I celebrate his birthday. So, Romans were really into syncretism, and we're going to wrap up here in a couple of minutes. Romans were familiar with the concept of syncretism because from their earliest times they had experienced with it. See, the Romans took over a lot of different places, and the Romans loved to come into these places, figure out what their different religions are, and then try to figure out how they can fit them into their Roman cult religion. That's what they did, and they were really good at it. So when a lot of Romans became followers of Yeshua, that was just their MO. Okay, now I can kind of add this to my bag of stuff, right? Bag of goodies, yeah. And I can still keep doing the things, you know, but I just make them now I just make them kosher, in other words, right? Let me go. Deuteronomy 12:29. It says the following: do not worship me the way the pagans worship their gods. And I said this at Shavuot. When they built that golden calf, they were not worshiping that golden calf. Test me on that, I dare you. They were not worshiping that golden calf. They were worshiping Hashem, the God of Israel, through the golden calf. And Aaron says, let's make a golden calf, because tomorrow will be a feast too, and it uses the name of God, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. He was not worshiping that golden calf. They were doing something outside the protocols of ordained worship. When we do the same thing, we're erecting a golden calf. We cannot worship the one true God the way pagans worship their gods. that is not kosher to him. We have to worship him the way he says to worship him. We have to. We cannot reupholster pagan religion and make it about him. It's unacceptable. All right? We're going to pick up here next week, and we'll have a part 3B. Let's do that, because I want to make sure we have room for questions and stuff. Yeah?
I just wanted to mention back in Marcionism that in
Go back.
the light of, in the okay, my brain's working.
You just lost it? Yeah, Bob?
We're going to talk about Augustine. He was around about 355. He was also playing a part.
Yeah, there's a lot that I skim over. There's a lot of growing anti-Semitism within the early church and within the church fathers. Because, I mean, first of all, Romans were anti-Semitic. Romans did not like Jews. Even if they're just a pagan Roman, they did not like Jews. They were weird. And they didn't worship the pantheon of gods. They were allowed to not worship the pantheon of gods. Jews had legal exemption to be Jews. But non-Jews who came to faith in the Jewish Messiah, they were not under that legal protection, and they were atheists. So, but anti-Semitism, once it took root within the church, it began to grow. And we're going to talk more about some of the unfortunate anti-Semites that became leaders within the sect known as the Way. Yeah.
In 1768, Encyclopedia Britannica,
Yeah.
that in a book form, not like something you find on the internet, it says in the Council of Nicaea that he changed the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday. And if you go into many languages in Spanish,
Yes.
Saturday is sábado.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of languages that when you
Preserve
see
that.
the word Saturday, it will have the root word of Sabbath in it. So you have two physical witnesses outside of this that he gives us to show us this is the way of walking.
Yeah.
And
I counted 39 languages that have the word Sabbath as their name of the seventh day of the week.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, growing up now, atheistic Russia,
Yeah.
in the Russian language, the day for Sunday is actually the resurrection.
Oh, interesting.
So that's another reason why they validate
Yeah.
that they worship on Sunday, because I go to sometimes I go to the Baptist church and they're impossible. All they know is I keep the Sabbath. They don't know anything else.
Yeah.
I don't just throw it all out there for them. But she said, but this is why we do it. And I said, I don't study, but that is what they say, that he was resurrected on Sunday, and it is the resurrection day, and so now it's changed, and they use the scripture in Acts where they met
On the first day of the week.
on the first day of the week, but we believe that's first fruits.
He didn't raise on Sunday so much as he rose on the already established holiday called First Fruits.
Absolutely.
And he presented himself as the first fruit offering of the resurrection of the dead.
Absolutely.
The Sunday aspect was kind of just arbitrary.
Yes.
Now the believers did start meeting on the first day of the week to collect money and to bring money together to send to Jerusalem. But when did the day start in the Jewish culture? In the evening. So is it possible that they collected money on Saturday night when they got together to close out Shabbat?
Absolutely.
So you got to take that into consideration as well. Nowhere did they say, okay, let's start changing the Sabbath to Sunday. That's just not there. But any other questions, comments? Yeah.
I mean, didn't they view that anyways that Sunday was just like the first day of Shabbat,
Yeah.
like they counted down to Shabbat.
Yeah. It was Yom Echad. And yeah, it was just day one. They didn't call it Sunday or anything like that. Still to this day.
They call it Yom Rishon.
Yom Rishon, sorry. Still to this day, however, within the religious Jewish communities, you don't say that, because all of our days of the weeks are named of the Roman gods. And Jewish practice is that you don't even let names of pagan gods exit your mouth. So to say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all of those, if you look them up, all of those days of the week are named after those pagan deities that the Romans worship. They worshiped a pagan deity on that day. It was Woden's day, Thor's day, Frigg's day, Saturn's day. You see what I'm talking about here? The Romans did that. And then there was the sun day. And that was probably the biggest day of the week, is the Sunday, the giver of all life, right? So, but yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
You look at, they're carrying the pole with the Roman eagle on it. What do you see on all our federal courthouses? There's a Roman eagle up there.
Yeah.
And that's right.
We get a lot of our concept of republic
and
and
seeing this, obelisk and what they stand for.
yeah. Well, we'll wrap things up. Are you guys digging this so far?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. We'll do part 3B some next Saturday. Okay, part 3B.